Valith Sornai stood alone in her chambers, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her pale violet skin looked almost gray in the dim light. Her silver eyes, usually bright and sharp, now seemed dull and lifeless. In just a few hours, she would be bonded to a human. The thought made her stomach twist with fear. The Kitharan Empire and the United Earth Coalition had been at war for nearly 20 years. Millions had died on both sides. Cities had burned. Entire planets had been scarred by weapons that left nothing but ash and silence. When the ceasefire finally came, everyone said it was a miracle. But miracles, Valith had learned, always came with a price. The price was her dot as part of the Galactic Reconciliation Accord. The two species would be joined through a symbolic marriage. A Kitharan noble would wed a human officer. It would show the galaxy that peace was possible. It would prove that old enemies could become allies. And Valith, youngest daughter of the great diplomatic house of Sornai, had been chosen for this honor. She did not feel honored. She felt like a sacrifice. Her door slid open, and her father stepped inside. Lord Karasaranai was tall and elegant, with the same violet skin and silver eyes as his daughter. But where Valith's eyes held fear, his held only cold calculation. He had always been this way. To him, family was not about love. It was about power and position. "You are not yet dressed," he said, his voice flat with disapproval. "I will be ready," Valith replied quietly. "See that you are." He walked closer, studying her with the same expression he might give a piece of furniture. "This union is essential for our house, for our people. Do not embarrass me." Valith wanted to scream at him. She wanted to ask if he cared at all about what she felt. But she had learned long ago that such questions were useless. Her father did not care about feelings. He cared about results. "I understand, father," she said instead. He nodded once and left without another word. Valith turned back to the mirror and began to prepare herself. She put on the ceremonial robes of bonding, layers of flowing silver and white fabric that felt heavy on her shoulders. She arranged her long dark hair in the traditional style. She painted the ritual marks upon her face. With each step, she felt more and more like she was preparing for her own funeral. She had heard so many stories about humans. Her tutors had taught her that they were violent and unpredictable. They were ruled by their emotions, unable to control their anger or their desires. They fought wars not just for resources or territory, but for abstract ideas like honor and revenge. The Kitharan people called them the Chaos Breed because they seemed to bring destruction wherever they went. And now she would belong to one of them. The ceremony was held on a massive orbital station that floated in neutral space between the two empires. Thousands of diplomats and officials had gathered to witness the historic event. Cameras from 100 worlds would broadcast the bonding across the galaxy. Valith walked down the long aisle toward the central platform, feeling the weight of all those eyes upon her. Her hands trembled beneath her robes. She kept her face still and calm, as she had been trained to do. But inside she was screaming. Then she saw him. The human stood waiting on the platform. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with short brown hair and eyes the color of a stormy sky. He wore the formal uniform of the Earth Coalition, dark blue with silver trim. His face was serious, but not cruel. He stood very still, watching her approach. This was Daniel Carter, her future bondmate. Her husband, in human terms. Valith had expected him to look at her with hunger or possession. Kitharan males often looked at females that way, especially during bonding ceremonies. But Daniel's expression was different. He looked almost sad, as if he understood how difficult this was for her. She reached the platform and stopped before him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Daniel did something that surprised her. He placed his right hand over his heart and bowed his head in the Kithran gesture of respect. It was not a perfect bow. His form was slightly wrong, and his timing was a bit off. But it was clear he had studied her customs. He had tried to learn. No one had told her he would do that. The officiator began the ritual words, speaking in both Kithran and Earth Standard. Velith heard the words, but they seemed distant and unreal. She was too focused on the man standing before her, trying to understand him. When the time came, they extended their wrists. The officiator pressed the bonding device against their skin, and Velith felt a brief, sharp pain as the marks were burned into her flesh. Matching symbols now decorated both their wrists. In the eyes of both their peoples, they were now joined. "The bonding is complete," the officiator announced. "May this union bring lasting peace between our worlds." The crowd applauded. Lights flashed as images were captured. Diplomats smiled and nodded to each other, pleased with the success of their political creation. Velith felt nothing but emptiness. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Hundreds of people approached him, offering congratulations and well wishes. Velith smiled and nodded and said the proper words, all while feeling like she was watching herself from very far away. Daniel stood beside her, shaking hands and thanking people, but he did not try to touch her or pull her close. He kept a respectful distance, as if he sensed that she needed space. Later that night, they boarded the diplomatic vessel that would be their home for the coming months. It was a large ship, designed for comfort and status. Their quarters were in the upper section, a suite of rooms decorated in a blend of Kithran and human styles. Daniel showed her to the bedroom. It was large and elegant, with a wide bed covered in soft fabrics. "This is your room," he said quietly. "I will take the quarters down the hall." Velith blinked in surprise. "You will not stay here?" He shook his head. "Not unless you want me to. And I don't think you do." He gave her a small, gentle smile. "Get some rest, Velith. It has been a long day." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone. Velith stood in the empty room, her heart pounding with confusion. This was not what she had expected. This was not what she had been told humans were like. She did not know what to make of Daniel Carter. But as she lay down on the soft bed, still wearing her ceremonial robes, she realized something strange. For the first time since learning of her fate, she felt a tiny flicker of something other than fear. She felt curious. The first weeks aboard the diplomatic vessel were the loneliest of her life. She kept to her quarters as much as possible, leaving only when absolutely necessary. She ate her meals alone. She spoke to no one unless required. She built walls around herself, thick and high, hoping they would protect her from the strange new world she had been forced into. Daniel did not try to break down those walls. He did not bang on her door demanding attention. He did not complain about her absence at meals or events. He simply waited. Every morning, Velith would find a tray of food outside her door. The meals were always a mix of Kithran and human dishes, carefully arranged and still warm. A small note would be tucked beside the tray, written in neat handwriting. The notes were never demanding or romantic. They were simple and kind. "I hope you slept well. The ship's chef made fresh bread today. I thought you might enjoy it. There is a beautiful nebula visible from the observation deck on level 3. It will be in view until tomorrow morning if you want to see it. I found a shop on the station that sells Kithran tea. I left some in the kitchen for you. I hope I got the right kind." At first, Velith ignored the notes. She ate the food because she was hungry, but she threw away the little papers without reading them carefully. She told herself she did not care about Daniel's kindness. She told herself it was all an act, a trick to make her lower her guard. But as the days passed, she found herself reading the notes more slowly. She found herself wondering about the man who wrote them. One evening, she received a message on her personal screen. It was an invitation to a formal dinner with several ambassadors who had come aboard to discuss trade agreements. Her presence was required as Daniel's bondmate. She could not refuse. Valith dressed carefully, choosing a simple gown of deep blue. She arranged her hair and painted the minimal marks appropriate for such an event. When she emerged from her quarters, Daniel was waiting on the corridor. He wore his formal uniform, and he smiled gently when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said softly. Valith did not know how to respond. Kithaeron males rarely gave such compliments. When they did, it usually meant they wanted something in return. She waited for Daniel to make a demand or reach for her, but he simply gestured toward the lift. "Shall we go?" The dinner was long and tedious. The ambassadors talked endlessly about shipping routes and resource sharing. Valith sat beside Daniel, silent and still, playing her role as the obedient bondmate. She noticed that Daniel included her in conversations whenever possible. He asked her opinion on matters related to Kithaeron customs. He made sure her glass was always filled. He never spoke over her or dismissed her words. When one of the human ambassadors made a joke about Kithaeron women being cold and emotionless, Daniel's expression changed. His smile disappeared. His gray eyes turned hard. "Kithaeron people express emotions differently than we do," he said, his voice calm but firm. "That does not mean they feel less. I would ask you to remember that my wife is sitting right here, Ambassador." The table went silent. The ambassador turned red and mumbled an apology. Valith stared at Daniel, her heart beating fast. No one had ever defended her like that. Not her father. Not her brothers. No one. Daniel turned to her and gave her a small, reassuring nod. Then he smoothly changed the subject, steering the conversation back to safer waters. That night, Valith lay awake for hours, thinking about what had happened. Daniel had called her his wife. He had defended her honor in front of important people, risking embarrassment and political trouble. Why would he do that? What did he want from her? She could not find an answer that made sense. The next morning, she found another package outside her door. This one was different from the usual meal trays. It was a small box wrapped in plain paper. Inside, she found a book. Not a data tablet, but an actual physical book with real pages, bound in soft leather. It was a collection of Kithaeron poetry, the same collection she had loved as a child. She had mentioned it once, briefly, during that terrible dinner. She had said she missed having real books. That data screens were not the same. A note was tucked inside the cover, written in careful Kithaeron script. The letters were a little clumsy, clearly written by someone still learning the language, but the message was clear. "I hope this brings you some comfort." Daniel Valith held the book in her hands for a long time. She ran her fingers over the leather cover. She smelt the old paper. Memories of her childhood flooded back, of sitting in her mother's garden reading these same poems before her mother had died, before her father had become so cold, before war had taken everything good from her life. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She did not try to stop them. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider a strange and frightening possibility. Maybe Daniel was not pretending. Maybe his kindness was real. That afternoon, Valith left her quarters. She walked through the ship's corridors, past crew members who nodded respectfully, until she found the observation deck on level 3. The nebula Daniel had mentioned was still visible, a swirling cloud of purple and gold that filled the viewport with light. She was not alone. Daniel was there, sitting in one of the chairs, staring out at the stars. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped. He looked like a man carrying a heavy weight. He noticed her and straightened up, surprise flickering across his face. "Valith, I didn't expect to see you here." She hesitated at the entrance, suddenly unsure. Part of her wanted to run back to her room, to hide behind her walls again. But another part, a part that was growing stronger each day, wanted to stay. "The nebula," she said quietly. "You said it was beautiful." Daniel smiled. It was a real smile, warm and unguarded, and it changed his whole face. "It is. Please, sit down. If you want to." Valeth walked slowly across the room and sat in the chair beside him. They did not speak. They simply watched the stars together. Two strangers from enemy worlds, bound by politics but perhaps connected by something more after a long while. Valeth spoke. "Thank you for the book." Daniel turned to look at her. "You're welcome. How did you find it?" "Physical books from Kithra are very rare." "I searched for a while," he admitted. "I called in some favors. It wasn't easy, but..." He shrugged. "You seemed sad when you talked about it." "I wanted to help." Valeth stared at him, trying to understand. "Why? Why do you do these things for me? I have given you nothing. I have not even been kind to you." Daniel was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft and honest. "Because kindness shouldn't depend on what you get back. You didn't choose this marriage any more than I did. The least I can do is make it easier for you." Valeth did not know what to say, so she said nothing. She simply turned back to the nebula and let the silence wrap around them like a blanket. But inside, something was changing. The walls around her heart were beginning to crack. After that evening, on the observation deck, something shifted between Valeth and Daniel. After that evening, on Daniel, she still kept her distance, still retreated to her quarters when the days grew too overwhelming. But she no longer avoided him completely. She began to emerge from her rooms more often. She joined him for meals sometimes. She sat beside him at official functions without feeling like she was choking. She also began to watch him, not with fear or suspicion, but with genuine curiosity. She wanted to understand this strange human who treated her with such unexpected gentleness. Daniel was kind to everyone, she noticed. Not just to her. He knew the names of every crew member on the ship, from the captain down to the people who cleaned the corridors. He asked about their families, their hobbies, their dreams. He remembered details from previous conversations and brought them up later, showing that he truly listened when people spoke. One afternoon, Valeth watched from a distance as Daniel mediated a dispute between two crew members. They were arguing loudly about a scheduling conflict, their voices rising with frustration. Daniel stepped between them, calm and patient. He did not raise his voice or threaten punishment. He simply listened to both sides, asked careful questions, and helped them find a solution that worked for everyone. By the end, both crew members were shaking hands and apologizing to each other. This was not the violent, chaotic human she had been taught to fear. This was something else entirely. Another day, she found Daniel in the ship's small garden, a room filled with plants from dozens of worlds. He was on his knees in the dirt, carefully tending to a row of flowers. His uniform jacket was thrown aside, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong arms covered in old scars. "I didn't know you liked gardening," Valeth said from the doorway. Daniel looked up, surprised but pleased to see her. "My mother had a garden back on Earth. When I was young, I used to help her with it. These days it helps me relax." He wiped his hands on a cloth and stood up. "Would you like to help?" Valeth hesitated. She had never done anything like gardening before. In her family, such work was considered beneath noble status. But looking at Daniel's open, hopeful expression, she found herself nodding. They worked side by side for over an hour, planting seeds and pulling weeds and watering the soil. Daniel showed her how to handle the delicate roots without breaking them. He explained which plants needed more sunlight and which preferred shade. His voice was patient and warm, never making her feel foolish for not knowing these simple things. When they finished, Valith looked down at her dirty hands and ruined gown. A proper Kithran lady would have been horrified. But Valith found herself laughing, a small sound that surprised even her. Daniel grinned. "You have dirt on your nose." She touched her face and laughed again. It felt strange, like using a muscle she had forgotten she had. As the weeks passed, their conversations grew longer and deeper. Daniel told her about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests that covered his homeworld. He described the cities full of millions of people, the noise and energy and chaos of human civilization. He spoke about the war, about the battles he had fought and the friends he had lost. One evening, as they sat together on the observation deck watching the stars drift by, Daniel told her about his brother. His name was Kevin, Daniel said quietly. He was 5 years younger than me, always smiling, always joking. He joined the military because he wanted to be like me. He paused, his jaw tightening. He died in a battle near the Kithran border. His ship was destroyed. There was nothing left to bury. Valith felt her heart ache with sympathy. She knew what it was like to lose someone. Her mother had died when she was young, taken by an illness that could not be cured. "I am sorry," she said softly. "That must have been very painful." Daniel nodded slowly. "It was. For a long time, I was angry. I hated your people. I wanted revenge." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes filled with old pain. "But hatred is exhausting, Valith. It eats you from the inside. I decided I didn't want to carry that weight anymore." "You don't blame us? For your brother?" "I blame the war. I blame the politicians and generals who couldn't find another way. But I don't blame you or ordinary Kithran people who were just trying to survive like everyone else." He reached out and gently touched her hand. "War makes enemies of people who might have been friends. I truly believe that." Valith stared at him, overwhelmed by his words. She had expected bitterness or hidden anger. She had expected him to eventually reveal his true feelings, to show her the violent human underneath the gentle surface. But there was no violence in Daniel Carter. There was only a deep, weary sadness and a stubborn hope for something better. "You are not what I expected," she whispered. Daniel smiled softly. "Neither are you." They sat together in comfortable silence, their hands still touching. Outside the viewport, stars burned like tiny fires in the endless darkness. Valith began to look forward to their time together. She found herself smiling when she heard his voice in the corridor. She noticed when he was tired or stressed and learned to recognize the small signs of worry in his expression. She caught herself wondering what he was thinking, what he was feeling, whether he was happy. She was falling for him. She knew it, and the knowledge terrified her. One night she woke from a terrible nightmare. In the dream, she was back in her father's house, alone and cold, and Daniel was gone forever. She had called out for him, but no one answered. She woke up gasping, her heart pounding, tears streaming down her face. Without thinking, she left her quarters and walked down the corridor to Daniel's room. She stood outside his door for a long moment, trembling. What was she doing? This was foolish. She should go back to bed. But before she could turn away, the door slid open. Daniel stood there in simple sleeping clothes, his hair messy, his eyes concerned. "Valith? What's wrong?" She could not speak. She could not explain. She just stood there, shaking. Daniel did not ask questions. He simply opened his arms, offering comfort without demanding anything in return. Valith stepped forward and let him hold her. She pressed her face against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. He was warm and solid and real, and for the first time in years, she felt safe. "It's okay," Daniel murmured, stroking her hair gently. "I'm here. You're not alone." She cried in his arms until the fear passed. And when she finally pulled away, she looked up at his kind, patient face and realized the truth she'd been running from. She loved him. Against all logic, against everything she had been taught, she loved this human, and she had no idea what to do about it. The news came on a cold morning, delivered by Ambassador Lyra Venn herself. Lyra was a senior Kithran official who had always treated Valeth with quiet sympathy. Now her silver eyes were filled with worry as she entered their quarters. "There is a problem," Lyra said, her voice tight. "A serious one." Daniel set down his coffee and stood up. "What kind of problem?" Lyra glanced at Valeth, then back at Daniel. "Our intelligence has discovered a plot. A faction within the Kithran Empire is planning to sabotage the peace treaty. They believe the marriage was a humiliation, a sign of weakness. They view Lady Valeth as a traitor to our people." Valeth felt the blood drain from her face. "A traitor? For following the orders of my own government? They do not care about orders. They care about pride and old hatreds." Lyra's expression was grim. "They have sent assassins to this ship. Their mission is to kill you both and destroy any hope of lasting peace." Daniel's jaw tightened. "How many? When will they strike?" "We do not know exactly. Our intelligence suggests there may be 2 or 3 agents already aboard, hidden among the crew or passengers. They could strike at any moment." Veleth's hands began to shake. She had known there were people who hated the peace treaty. She had known there were extremists who would rather continue the war forever. But she had never imagined they would come for her specifically. She had never thought her own people would want her dead. Daniel moved closer to her and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We need to increase security. Lock down the ship. Screen everyone." "We are doing that," Lyra said. "But these assassins are professionals. They will not be easy to find." The next 2 days were tense and frightening. Armed guards were posted outside their quarters. Daniel insisted that Valeth stay close to him at all times. He barely slept, spending his nights reviewing security reports and checking in with the ship's officers. His gray eyes were constantly moving, watching for any sign of danger. Valeth tried to act normal, but fear gnawed at her constantly. Every unfamiliar face seemed threatening. Every shadow made her flinch. She found herself staying very close to Daniel, finding comfort in his solid presence. On the 3rd night, the attack came. They were walking through a quiet corridor on the lower deck, returning from a meeting with the ship's captain. The lights were dim, and the hallway was empty. Daniel was talking about their schedule for the next day when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "Something's wrong," he said quietly. Before Valeth could ask what he meant, a figure stepped out of an alcove ahead of them. Then another appeared behind them. Both were dressed in plain gray clothing, their faces hidden behind masks. They moved with the silent grace of trained killers. Daniel reacted instantly. He shoved Valeth behind him, placing his body between her and the attackers. He had no weapon, but he raised his fists, ready to fight. "Run!" he shouted at her. "Get to the security station." But Valeth could not move. Fear had frozen her legs. She could only watch in horror as the 2 assassins rushed forward. Daniel met the first attacker with a powerful punch that sent the man staggering backward. He spun and blocked a kick from the second, then countered with a strike to the throat. His movements were fast and brutal, the skills of a soldier who had survived years of war, but he was outnumbered and unarmed. The first assassin recovered and drew a blade, a long curved knife that gleamed in the dim light. He slashed at Daniel's side, and Valeth screamed as the blade cut through uniform and flesh. Blood sprayed across the corridor wall. Daniel grunted in pain but did not fall. He grabbed the assassin's wrist and twisted hard. The knife clattered to the floor. Daniel drove his elbow into the man's face, and the assassin collapsed, unconscious. The second attacker tackled Daniel from behind. They crashed to the floor, struggling and rolling. Daniel's wound was bleeding badly now, leaving dark stains on the metal floor. But he kept fighting, kept protecting her, even as his strength faded. Velith finally broke free of her fear. She picked up the fallen knife with trembling hands. She did not know how to fight, had never held a weapon in her life. But she could not just stand there and watch Daniel die for her. The second assassin pinned Daniel to the ground and raised a blade of his own, aiming for Daniel's heart. Velith ran forward and drove her knife into the assassin's shoulder. It was not a killing blow, but it was enough. The man screamed and turned toward her, his eyes filled with rage. At that moment, the security team finally arrived. Guards swarmed through the corridor, weapons raised. They tackled the wounded assassin and secured both attackers. Someone was calling for medical help. Someone else was shouting orders. Velith dropped the knife and fell to her knees beside Daniel. He was lying on his back, his face pale and sweating, blood pooling beneath him. His eyes were half closed, but he managed to focus on her face. "Velith," he whispered. "Are you okay?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. "You fool. You complete fool. You almost died." He tried to smile. "Couldn't let them hurt you. Stop talking. Save your strength." She pressed her hands against his wound, trying to slow the bleeding. His blood was warm and red, so different from the purple blood of her people. "Help is coming. Just hold on." Daniel's hand found hers and squeezed weakly. "I'm sorry. I scared you. Don't apologize. Just don't you dare die on me." Her voice broke. "Do you understand? I forbid it." The medical team arrived and took over. They loaded Daniel onto a stretcher and rushed into the medical bay. Velith followed, refusing to leave his side. She held his hand the entire way, whispering prayers to gods she had not believed in for years. In the medical bay, the doctors worked frantically. The blade had cut deep, damaging organs that needed immediate repair. Velith sat in the corner, covered in Daniel's blood, shaking and crying. Hours passed. Finally, the head doctor emerged and told her that Daniel would survive. The wound was serious, but he was strong. He would recover. Velith nearly collapsed with relief. When Daniel woke the next morning, she was sitting beside his bed, still wearing her blood-stained clothes. She had not moved, had not eaten, had not slept. She had simply sat there, watching him breathe, terrified that he might stop. His eyes fluttered open and found her face. "You stayed," he murmured, his voice rough with pain. Velith took his hand and held it tight. "You almost died for me. My own people tried to kill me, and you, a human, bled for me." Her voice trembled. "No one has ever done that. No one has ever protected me like that." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "You're not just a symbol to me, Velith. You never were." She bent down and pressed her forehead against his hand, tears falling onto his skin. "I know," she whispered. "I finally understand." Daniel spent 2 weeks in the medical bay recovering from his wounds. Velith stayed with him for nearly every hour of every day. She read to him from her book of Kithran poetry. She brought him meals and made sure he ate. She sat beside his bed and talked with him about everything and nothing, filling the quiet hours with words and laughter. The crew noticed a change in her. The cold, distant noblewoman had transformed into something warmer, someone who smiled and spoke and cared openly. They whispered about it in the corridors, amazed at what they were seeing. The bonding that had started as a political arrangement was becoming something real. Meanwhile, the investigation into the assassination attempt moved quickly. The 2 captured assassins were interrogated and revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. A small but dangerous faction within the Kithran Empire had been planning to destroy the peace treaty from the beginning. They believed that war was the natural state between the species, and that peace was a betrayal of everything. Their people stood for Ambassador. Lyra then worked with human and Kithran officials to dismantle the faction. Dozens of conspirators were arrested across multiple planets. The leaders were brought to trial and sentenced. The threat was eliminated, and the peace treaty emerged stronger than before. The story of what happened aboard the diplomatic vessel spread across the galaxy. Everyone learned how a human officer had nearly died protecting his Kithran wife from assassins sent by her own people. It became a powerful symbol of what the peace could truly mean. A story of sacrifice and loyalty that crossed the boundaries between species. When Lord Karis Serenai sent a message demanding that Valith distance herself from Daniel to protect the family's political reputation, she refused. For the first time in her life, she openly defied her father. "I will not pretend that my husband is a stranger," she told him through the communication screen, her voice firm and steady. "He nearly died for me. He has shown me more kindness than you ever did. I will not dishonor that by pushing him away." Her father's face twisted with anger. "You are making a mistake. You are ruining everything we have built." "No, Father. I am finally building something worth having." She ended the connection and did not look back. On the day Daniel was finally released from the medical bay, Valith was waiting for him at the door. He walked slowly, still weak from his injuries, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Ready to get out of here?" he asked, smiling. "More than ready." She moved to his side and slipped her arm through his, supporting him as they walked. "The doctors say you need rest and gentle exercise. I thought we might visit the garden." "That sounds perfect." They made their way through the ship, past crew members who nodded respectfully and smiled at them. Word had spread about how Valith had stayed by Daniel's side through his entire recovery, how she had defied her father, how she had finally embraced the man she was bonded to. The crew approved. They were rooting for them. The garden was quiet and peaceful. Sunlight from the artificial lighting bathed the plants in warm golden light. Daniel lowered himself onto a bench and took a deep breath, smelling the flowers and fresh soil. Valith sat beside him. For a while, they simply enjoyed the peace and beauty of the garden. "I have been thinking," Valith said eventually. "About what?" "About us. About what happens next." She turned to look at him, her silver eyes serious. "This marriage was forced on both of us. We did not choose each other. But now," she hesitated, searching for the right words, "now I would choose you. If I could do it all again, knowing what I know now, I would choose you willingly." Daniel reached out and took her hand. "I would choose you too." Her breath caught. "You would?" "From the first moment I saw you in that ceremonial hall, I knew you were special. Not because of your beauty or your status, but because of the strength I saw in your eyes. You were terrified, but you held yourself with such dignity. I admired you from the very beginning." Valith felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I was so afraid of you. I believed all the terrible things I had been taught about humans. I thought you would be cruel and violent and selfish. And now? Now I understand why the galaxy fears your kind." She reached up and touched his face gently. "It is not your strength or your weapons or your aggression. It is your capacity to care, even for those who were once your enemies. Your ability to love without conditions, to forgive without demands, to hope even when hope seems foolish." She smiled through her tears. "That is the most terrifying power of all, and the most beautiful." Daniel leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers. They stayed that way for a long moment, breathing together, hearts beating in harmony. "I love you, Valith," he whispered. "Not because I have to. Not because of any treaty or arrangement. I love you because of who you are. And I love you, Daniel Carter. My human, my husband." My choice. He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. It was their first real kiss, and it felt like the beginning of something wonderful. Months later, their ship returned to the neutral station where their bonding had taken place. But this time, everything was different. They walked through the corridors hand in hand, smiling and talking, clearly and obviously in love. Diplomats and officials watched them pass with amazement. This was not the reluctant political couple who had been married here so long ago. These were two people who had found each other against all odds. On their last night at the station, Valeth found Daniel on the observation deck, watching the stars as he so often did. She went to stand beside him, pressing close to his warmth. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The future," he said. "Our future. I never thought I would have this. After the war, after everything I lost, I didn't think I could ever be happy again." He turned to her, his gray eyes shining. "You proved me wrong." Valeth smiled and took his hand. "We proved each other wrong. You showed me that humans are not monsters. I hope I showed you that Kitharans can love just as deeply as anyone." You did. Every single day, they stood together, watching the stars burn in the infinite darkness. Behind them was a history of war and hatred and pain. Ahead of them was a future neither could have imagined. "Do you think the peace will last?" Valeth asked quietly. Daniel considered the question. "I don't know. There will always be people who prefer hatred over understanding. But I think we have a chance. A real chance." He squeezed her hand. "And whatever happens, we'll face it together." Valeth leaned her head against his shoulder. "Together," she agreed. The stars glittered like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Somewhere out there, two peoples who had once been enemies were learning to live side by side. It would not be easy. There would be struggles and setbacks and moments of doubt. But the foundation had been laid, built on an unexpected love between a Kitharan, noblewoman, and a human soldier. She had dreaded the human she was forced to wed. She had expected cruelty and violence and pain. Instead, she had found kindness, patience, and a love deeper than any she had ever known. That was the true power of humanity. Not their weapons or their armies or their technology, but their hearts. And Valeth was grateful every single day that Daniel Carter had given his to her.